we are joined here by David Dayen, the executive editor of the American Prospect, who has done an extraordinary amount of reporting on the incoming Department of Justice. We're going to talk about that today. In particular, let me start with something that people might have caught in the news, and that is Betsy DeVos having a kind of white knight moment from the Biden administration. You know, she was ordered by a judge to testify or give a deposition to plaintiffs in a lawsuit alleging that she had unfairly and arbitrarily screwed them around their. They're basically trying to get refunds on these from these scam for-profit colleges. Judge said, yes, you have to sit for this deposition. You're no longer Secretary of Education. The Biden's Justice Department said, oh, not so fast, and went to bat for DeVos. Brian Boynton was the lead attorney on that from the Department of Justice. What do we know about Brian Boynton, and what does it say about Merrick Garland's Department of Justice in the early stages?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Merrick Garland is not the Attorney General yet, but the Biden team is firmly in charge of who is involved in, taking over in a temporary capacity the Department of Justice. So when you see something like this happen, it's a result of people who Garland is likely to retain, and whether they're career officials or political officials who don't need Senate confirmation, who are installed by the Biden administration, that's who's running the show right now at DOJ. So you can, even though Garland isn't Attorney General, you can see these actions as indicative of the Biden administration's thinking and Merrick Garland's thinking. Presumably he has a decent amount of say over who is running the department right now, into, what they want to do at DOJ. And you're seeing a lot of people like Boynton, who comes from WilmerHale, which is this, sometimes we call it a white shoe law firm. This is a corporate defense firm that has a lot of corporate clients. Boynton, no different in that respect, who was put into this position and could be there for, a number of weeks, if not months. I mean, we don't know when Garland is going to get a hearing on the floor, and we certainly don't know when his deputies are. Some of them haven't even been, nominated yet. So these acting officials are going to be in charge for a while. And what they're doing with DeVos, essentially shielding her from the consequences of failing student borrowers, that's a really bad sign.
And Boynton himself, as I understand it, had represented for-profit schools in the past. WilmerHale certainly has, particularly University of Phoenix, and I believe the kind of umbrella group that represented a lot of the different for-profit schools across the board. Yet you saw this decision by the Biden Department of Justice to defend Betsy DeVos heralded by the kind of Washington legal establishment, almost like good for John Adams defending the British after the Boston Massacre type of thing. That this was what the Department of Justice ought to be doing. That it was being brought back to its rightful place in the political ecosystem. What did you make of that response?
Yeah, I mean, the Biden team rhetorically has done a lot of that work too. I mean, at a town hall the other day, talking about whether or not to prosecute Trump for the Capitol riot. And Biden says that's up to the Justice Department. We're going to get back to the Justice Department making these decisions. But, Biden is making decisions on who is going to be making those calls. If this is any indication of how they are going to look at the previous administration, I wouldn't expect anything to come out of that. And the sort of lauding from the Washington establishment is really almost a sigh of relief that anything that was done in the last 4 years is not going to face any kind of major sanction from main justice. Now, they might from other areas, New York Attorney General's office or elsewhere, but it's essentially, I mean, you could almost read this as sort of a warning signal or lack of warning signal, as it were, that you're going to be okay. We're not going to force Betsy DeVos into uncomfortable situations. We're not going to force other members of the Trump administration into uncomfortable situations. So it's pretty concerning, and it's something that's not really on the radar of a lot of people because, who really obsesses over the acting, assistant attorneys general and things like that. But it's significant.
Right, and it's interesting because in a lot of different places in Biden's cabinet, he has actually surprised progressives by the choices that he's made on the commissions and also the CFPB. You would have thought that, especially given what you saw this summer from Black Lives Matter and the direction that the Democratic Party has been taking in recent years around justice issues, that the DOJ wouldn't be the place that you'd have to worry about that as much. But it almost seems like in kind of trolling Republicans by going with Merrick Garland, I don't know if it was inadvertent or if it was a feature of the choice, but Merrick Garland is this creature of the Washington legal establishment. He's one of the most well-respected members of that establishment, which, so what he ended up doing is bringing with him all of these people who were his interns and his deputies in the 1980s and 1990s. And those kinds of people have spent the intervening 2 decades cycling in and out of the Justice Department and these white shoe law firms doing corporate work. And so, he knows them as these, bushy-tailed, brilliant Ivy Leaguers who were 28 when they were working for him. They spent the last 20, 30 years getting extremely rich on the backs of working people across the country doing legal work for corporations. Are you seeing any pushback on this, or do you think that Merrick Garland is just going to be able to kind of call the shots because he's been so lionized across the spectrum of the Democratic Party?
I don't think you're seeing a lot of scrutiny on this stuff right now. There's Garland isn't in place, and maybe there's an expectation that he's not driving this process just yet, even though he probably is. I'll give you an example of someone that we both have written about, which is Susan Davies. So she was a deputy to Garland when he served in the Justice Department back in the 1990s. And in those intervening years, as you said, she went to a big-time law firm and worked for Facebook, among other organizations, including pharmaceutical companies. But she was seen as a leading choice to be the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. And of course, there's a major Facebook lawsuit going on right now at the Justice Department. And this would be bringing in someone who would have to immediately recuse themselves from that lawsuit because they had in the past worked for that company. What we know now is that, and we know we have a pretty good sense that Garland was pushing for Davies to become Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. We do know that her bio on her corporate law page and her email have started to bounce back. So it seems like she's already there in some capacity at Justice, just hasn't been named yet. But may or may not be the Assistant Attorney General. So that's an example of someone in this position. I think that initially, when the justice picks were put out, there were a couple good names running the Civil Rights Division, for example. People like Kristen Clark from the Lawyers Committee, and I believe Vanita Gupta was also named. So there was sort of some hopefulness around at least those kinds of issues involving racial justice, that there would be a sea change at DOJ. But on the corporate law side, right, on the criminal white-collar law side, it could be business as usual, and I think that's something that really progressives need to speak out about.
And Susan Davies, our reporting suggested that she was going to be a deputy of his either way, whether or not she gets the AAG position for antitrust. So her leaving doesn't necessarily mean that she's getting the antitrust position, but she still might. And so, real quickly, last question: what's your read at this point on who's going to end up in charge of the antitrust division, and also at the FTC, which has kind of dual oversight there?
I think it's pretty up in the air. I mean, Davies certainly is a top candidate. We saw Renata Hess, who had worked for Google, also is a top candidate. She then sort of dropped out. There's a guy named Jonathan Cantor, who's more of a progressive reformer on these issues, who might get that job. But it's kind of under question. And antitrust reformers have done a pretty good job of being in that fight and trying to model who is going to get that position. Other ones might not be as other parts of the Justice Department might not have as much scrutiny, and therefore you get what you get.
All right. Dave Dayen, thanks so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.